4, and the last two, we'll do unit 3 and such. So let's have prayer and we'll begin. And so today, let me get this ready. We're going to begin where we left off, dealing with mass transportation issues and other things that have to do with the city. So let's have prayer there. Father, we do thank you that you are here and that you're helping us. And you not only are helping us in our studies, but you're helping us understand material and to prepare and to work forward. And we pray that you would have your hand on everything that we do. In Jesus' name we pray, amen. All right, so we're going to be looking at the whole issue here of mass transit. Now, we don't have much mass transit around here, unless you're using golf carts to get up and down the hill. But in major cities, this was a big innovation. Originally, you know, one of the worst things about major cities around the world was the pollution that was caused by all the animal dung that was deposited because of horse-drawn transportation. And even though some of these things would have originally been horse-drawn transportation, to come up with a solution for that was really important. Now, if you've played Monopoly, any of you played Monopoly? There are 4 railroads on Monopoly. Does anyone know what some of them are?
Sure.
The short line, that's very good. That's a whole category of railroads, and we're going to get to that in a second. One is named after my hometown, and most people mispronounce it. Please don't do that.
What's it start with?
An R.
Reading?
The Reading, and very good, you know how to say it too. The Reading Railroad. And then there's the B&O, Baltimore and Ohio. That, by the way, went from Baltimore to Ohio. And then there is the Pennsylvania Railroad, which was the main line. And most people are unaware of this, although you can figure it out. The game Monopoly is based on the layout of turn of the century, that is, from the 1800s to the 1900s, turn of the century, Atlantic City, New Jersey, because that's why Boardwalk is the most expensive piece of real estate, which was right up on the ocean. And those are the 4 railroads that serve Atlantic City. But the short line is a category. There was no such railroad called the short line, but short line railroads were necessary to bring people from major cities into smaller areas. And therefore, railroads like New York and Harlem Railroad that would have brought people to different parts of New York City and out onto Long Island and maybe up into more commuter type railroads. You might also have the Chicago and Milwaukee. Around here, Miss McConnell would have come to Jackson in 1924 by train, and it would have been the L&N, the Louisville and Nashville Railroad, which was sort of a short commuter line. If you made it to one of the major cities, that would help get you into the countryside. So those are important for getting people around a city into the outlying area. And even small towns would have had rail transportation back at the turn of the century, becoming into the early 1800s, early 1900s. Now in Chicago, up in San Francisco, they developed a whole new set of transportation. They had at first basically like a streetcar system that were pulled by horses. But if you know anything about San Francisco, it's a very hilly place. significant hills. In fact, there is this one place, Lombard Street, that is built on a curve. And the reason why it's built on a curve is that it's so steep that horses could not pull anything up the street. So they curved it to give it switchbacks so that the elevation they would have to go up made the street longer. And now it's just a tourist attraction to drive down the street on its the curvy street on its way down. And I wouldn't want to live there because people are constantly driving down the street all day long. But San Francisco replaced their horse-drawn cars with what became known as cable cars, and they still operate today. A huge cable, very similar to the kind of iron cable, or first of all, it would have been rope, but the kind of iron cable that was used to pull or to support the bridges like this. Cable bridges was developed by Washington Roebling. And it wasn't invented originally to build bridges with, but an iron braided cable to enable cable cars, whether they were in San Francisco, where the cable would pull the car up the hill. And they snake all through the city underground into a place where there are big steam generated machines that pull the cable. So when the cable is moving, the cable car will connect onto it with some kind of a gripper underneath the street, and it will pull the car up the hill. And then when they go down the hill, they will let go and just let gravity take over. There's a man on to make sure that there's a brake, that it won't go careening out of control. But I've ridden on the cable cars in San Francisco, and they're very similar to what you see here. This isn't San Francisco, but very similar to what you see here, where underneath the street here in this little open area is where the cable will be. In 1880, electrified trolleys were begun in cities that also replaced horse-drawn trolleys or around the city. And they did originally have horse-drawn trolleys, but this here is a picture of the kind of trolleys. This is not in Richmond, but Richmond, Virginia, who knew, is the very first city where there were cable-generated trolleys. Now, they still exist in places. Philadelphia and other cities still have electric trolleys. And in this case, there is a cable above the cable car, and it's connected. You can see behind that cable car, just slightly, there's like a line that goes up, and that has a wire that or a wire that connects to the wires up above. It can short out in the rain or something, so there are issues, but you can, these are run by electricity. Many cities have gone to some sort of bus or transit system, because you can more easily change the route of a bus by just having it steer differently than by rerouting all of the cables that make up, if your business changes. I mean, where people live and where people want to go might be different in 25 years than it is now. It's a big expense to move those. Traffic congestion began the need for elevated trains or subways. Here you can see multi-level infrastructure that many cities would move to. Up on the top where there are trees and flowers and birds and things, people would be walking, horse-drawn transportation, and eventually streetcars. You go down a level and you'll get to an elevated train that is running along the street, and this would be translated into electric trolleys. And then down below another level would be passenger trains that would bring people in from another city. Drop them off, they'd go upstairs, they could get onto a commuter short line train, or up to the very top surface where they would get a hired taxi or walk to where they want to go. And that type of system is still in use in many places. New York City was the first to develop a subway system in the United States. London in the world, but in the United States, New York City. Subways first in Boston in 1897, New York 1904, Philadelphia 1908. I've never been in the subways of Philadelphia, not that I know of. I have ridden the subways in New York, and in New York, they still work on a token system. So that if you have a token, you can go in and ride the subway, and you can go as long and far as you want until you get out of the subway. And there are people who make it their life goal to ride the entire system all the way through all the boroughs and switch chains and get back to where they started from on one token, because it can be done. In Washington, D.C., you can't do that. You are charged based on how far you've traveled that day. Going further costs you more money. So that's very similar to the way it works in London, where you have a card and you swipe it, you go in, they know when you got in, you swipe it again, and they know when you got off, and then they charge you an appropriate amount. River bridges also are being developed. The St. Louis Eads Bridge ended the reliance on river ferries in order to cross the Mississippi River, and that was huge. And that began to develop new bridges to help people get from place to place. New York City needed bridges because it's Manhattan's an island. Long Island obviously is an island. Staten Island is an island. It's a city of islands, and you need to have bridges or ferries to get across. Now, Staten Island still has a ferry, but nonetheless, it is there. Brooklyn Bridge, a steel cable suspension bridge designed by John and Washington Roebling, completed in 1883, was the largest bridge in the world at that time. It's also beautiful. And not only can you drive across it, but you can also walk across the top of the bridge, and there is a viewing platform where you can walk across the bridge as well as drive. And they actually put in extra steel, more steel than was required. And I'm glad they did, because if they hadn't done that, it might not have been able to withstand the heavy trucks and other types of vehicles that would come later, because it was built for horse and buggies. So it's possible that it could have become obsolete if they had not put in extra support at the time. And so the story of the building of this bridge is a fascinating one. And David McCullough, who's my favorite historian, has a book, a whole book on the building of the Brooklyn Bridge and how that came about. It is and if you want to go see, it's the predecessor to this bridge. Go to Cincinnati, the Roebling Bridge that goes from Kentucky to Cincinnati, which is right there at City Park, at the across the Ohio River. You can walk across it too, and it is a famous. It is the bridge that was the model for the Brooklyn Bridge. It's not as big as the Brooklyn Bridge, but it is an impressive bridge that proved that his design would work. Of iron braided cables that won't break, and they haven't broken. Of course, they do replace them every so often before they break. Now, skyscrapers. Now, this is a completely American idea. You're running out of land. And you may think that America has all the land at once, but running out of land in the inner city, one way to increase your investment is to go up. And there was a day when about 10 floors was all that could be expected to be built. because that's as far as humans would be willing to carry their suitcases and other belongings upstairs. But two things changed that. One was building design that made it possible to create a steel frame and girder system as a skeleton around which to build the building. So if it was going to be supported by just blocks and the walls had to support themselves, you either need to have very thick walls that make the rooms almost worthless if you're going to go up very high, or you need to rely on a wood constructed building, and that is not as strong, it's weak. So a steel skeleton was necessary to build the building into the sky. The second thing was the practicality of electric safety elevators. And an electric elevator at first was a problem because the same kind of braided cable that was used in the bridge was used in the elevator. And at first they were nylon rope. And what happens when you're going up the elevator, you're on the 10th floor and the cable breaks? What do you think happens?
You go down.
You go down faster than you came up. Well, one of the things was, if you have this elevator, and people were afraid to use them because of the fact that they could break, and they did. The safety elevator is different. The safety elevator had built into it a mechanism that when the elevator would eventually let go, there was a safety system, sort of like a claw, that was disengaged as it was going up. But if it started to fall and the cable broke, it would catch the sides of the elevator. This is true of any elevator. It's true of our elevator. It's true of it. And it will grab onto the sides, maybe more sophisticated now than this type of example, but grab onto the sides and it would prevent you from falling. And this was demonstrated at the World's Fair in Chicago by the inventor of the safety elevator. He went up to the top of his elevator shaft. He then manually cut the line holding him to show that he would not die when it let go. And to the great amazement of all, people came to watch the demonstration to see what happened to him. And they were impressed that it worked. And people then started buying this to put in much larger buildings. Now, this man here, Louis Sullivan of the Chicago School, is the inventor of what we think of as the skyscraper. After the Chicago fire of 1871, the Chicago School of Architects began to build tall buildings. The Home Insurance Building of 1885, 10 stories, William LeBron Jenney, the Schlesinger and Meyer department store, Louis B. Sullivan, and the Reliance Building of 1894, Daniel Berman. And one of the things that will develop in that these buildings will be functional. Louis Sullivan built that one right there. That one you can see, form follows function. It's square, it's tall. There's the lack of ornamentation on the outside. And he will define architecture in America at the turn of the 20th century. Another thing that will develop are huge and not so huge stores. This right here is a store that still exists. You go to Philadelphia, it's not called Wanamaker's anymore. It's called Hecht's. But nonetheless, John Wanamaker's store in Philadelphia would be seen as the beginning of what we think of as the department store, even before Macy's. It was opened as the Grand Depot in Philadelphia. And it was called a palace of consumption. It made shopping a social art. You know, before this, you wanted to go shopping, what did you do? You figured out what you needed, you went to the store and you got it. I suppose if you're looking at Olson's Mercantile or the Ike Gotsey store, I have often been watching the Waltons and Mrs. not Mrs. England, but Mrs. Walton, Grandma Walton shows up and they say, "Can I help you?" "No, I'm just pricing a few things." Like the price has really changed a whole lot since the last time she was there. Although, but nonetheless, these were magnificent stores. It made going to the store an event. Not only did you dress up to go shopping in your best clothes, but it embodied the importance of the modern city dweller. Large glass display windows with clean sidewalks would open the people who just walked by on the outside with an experience of seeing what was inside. This became known as window shopping. That you just went by the stores and looked in to see what was available to buy. Even when you go to the mall these days, a lot of the stores will have big windows in the front with displays of various wares in the window that try and mimic this idea that you're walking along the street. Multi-story emporiums divided into departments arranged by products. And so there would be a whole floor for clothes, a whole floor for housewares, toys, whatever. Some departments served the poor and others the affluent. So there would be sections of the store, like maybe the bargain basement, where some people would be going for bargains or for the people who were less affluent. Then there would be certain floors that they were open to the general public, but everyone knew that was not the place to go unless you wanted to spend huge sums of money. But you could just go and look and see what was available. They would hire women because more and more women would come to the stores to shop themselves. When there was a little bit of money and they weren't having to work, but they could go out and shop. And in many of these stores, men worked the counters, even in the women's departments. But they started to hire sales girls to put their women customers at ease, especially to sell women's products. If anyone's ever read the books by Anne of Green Gables, you will remember that when not Marilla, but the gentleman that is staying, that she lives with, goes to town and he's afraid to talk to women. So he goes to the store that he believes will have a man working the counter. And it turns out that there's a lady there anyway, and he has to explain to her that he doesn't need a rake and seed and whatever, but he really needs a dress for Anne. In this case, it worked the exact opposite. You want to get women. And so women working in stores became a profession that otherwise they would not have. Marshall Fields became the first store of this type in Chicago, and they're also famous for being the first store that would give the customer a receipt that proved they had bought something after the sale, because before that, if you bought something, there was no way to prove where you bought it or what you had paid for it, and there was no such thing as a guarantee, and if it wasn't perfect, well, it's your problem. So that was a brand new idea. Then there were people who could not get to the store, so whole companies developed that were developed around selling things to the nation. And when rural free delivery and parcel post opened as a service of the post office, rural free delivery means that they will bring mail to your house for free. They didn't always do that. And delivering packages to your house. Then, two companies capitalized on this. One, mail order houses such as Montgomery Ward and the Sears Roebuck Company distributed 6 million catalogs annually. And the most famous of these eventually would be Sears Roebuck Company. Now, they eventually would open retail stores. And if they were smart, Sears would be Amazon. Because at one time, they sold by catalog. They didn't have any stores anywhere. And you would think that they would have been innovative enough to see the coming of the internet and go back to their, instead of discontinuing their catalog, to convert to online sales. They would have been an innovator in that, but they weren't. The way that Sears gained market share was that they made their catalog just slightly smaller than the Montgomery Ward catalog, only like 1/8 of an inch smaller around. But you would know that just naturally, if you were piling up a collection of books, you're just naturally going to put, or more likely to put, the smallest one on top. And since these people had more than one catalog, he knew that the Sears catalog would have just as much information in it if it was 1/8 of an inch smaller around, but it would naturally go on top. And so you would pick that one first when you were thinking about placing an order. Another type of store, this is also out of business. I don't know if Sears is completely out of business today, but it's close to it, if it isn't. There's almost none left. Of course, John Wanamaker's is gone too. Is Woolworth. Now, Woolworth was a different kind of store. It opened what became known as Five and Dimes. And these were opened in small towns. J.C. Penney would have began as a similar type store. It was called the Golden Rule Emporium. You would be treated right there by J.C. Penney. And so you had Woolworth, 5 and 10. They had lunch counters. And I can remember Woolworths being a store. They were all over Jamaica too, all around in other parts of the world. Where Woolworth got themselves into trouble was in the South. The lunch counters were segregated and only whites could use them. And during the civil rights protests, especially in some southern cities, there were sit-ins where African Americans would sit at the counter and refuse to get up until they were served. And since they weren't going to be served, they wouldn't get up to allow whites to sit there who wanted to buy coffee. And this eventually led to massive disruptions in their sales. I don't know that they would have survived anyway in the modern market, but that certainly didn't help their cause. Now, what was life like in the city? Urban lifestyles. The very rich lived in exclusive neighborhoods and were lionized in the society pages of magazines. You can see here is a picture of the wealthy coming to a store, shopping, and then the poor are outside looking through the window at them, hoping to fantasizing what it would be like if they were wealthy enough to go in there and buy something. Middle-class city dwellers lived in apartments of 2 or 3 stories that were built out of row houses, which, if you've seen I Love Lucy, the brownstone that they lived in, that is presented in that show, is very typical of what city apartment living would have been like in the early 20th century. Now, by the way, that if you ever try and find the address that they lived at, it's somewhere out in the East River. The road doesn't go that far. 863 East 68th Street or something like that is their address. And the road doesn't go that far, so it's not a real address. But people like that did live in little apartments in the city. Similar to this, brownstones that would be apartments. Many of them had running water and even running hot water. They may even have bathrooms in them. So they were pretty efficient and convenient for the standard of living for that day. Anywhere else in the world, many of these places would not have had indoor plumbing. Clearly, not running hot water as well as cold. Now, commuting to the suburbs. Promised to redeem the nation from the drabbiness, crime, and social dislocation of the city. And with the increase of public transit, with short line railroads, trolleys, streetcars, and various other forms of transportation, you could live out on Long Island, just like I Love Lucy, when they will eventually, in the last season of I Love Lucy, move to Connecticut. They could then get the train, Ricky could, and go into town and work every day and then come home. That became feasible for lots of people. And so northern New Jersey, Long Island, Connecticut, upstate New York, just outside of the city, bedroom communities, and this is true of any metropolitan area, developed where people would get a home and all they did was sleep there. They were going into the city every day for work, whether driving or using public transit. Detached houses were thought to strengthen the family unit. Instead of living in an apartment, you have your own little house with a yard and a barbecue in the backyard. This was seen as an extension of urban life, and in many places, the cities began to expand out into the countryside and incorporated more land. Eventually, the city of New York would take in not just Manhattan Island, but also Staten Island, the Bronx, Brooklyn, Queens. So they expanded. Same thing with Boston. Areas around Brooklyn Heights and Beacon Hill, and they even filled in whole sections of the harbor and made new cities. Cincinnati sprawled out. In fact, if you ever go up to Cincinnati, there's a little place called Newell, Ohio, and that is the largest city. That never joined Cincinnati, and it's the largest city completely surrounded by another city. So if you live there, you can't get out of, you have to go through Cincinnati to get anywhere because they never joined up. So, but in the late 1800s, these cities began to expand. Cities consolidated unincorporated land into the city to make greater metropolitan systems. And the greatest example of that, as I mentioned, is New York. Brooklyn was its own city before, and it merged with New York. Parks. Frederick Law Olmsted. Now, he is from Boston. There's a National Historic Site celebrating him there. But he is also famous for developing inner city parks all around the United States, the largest of which is in Philadelphia, Fairmount Park, where the zoo is. Not nearly as well known as this one. In the center of Manhattan, anyone know what this park is called? It's centrally located in Manhattan.
Central Park.
You are correct. It is Central Park. And when this park was created, there were still farms in the upper part of New York on Manhattan Island. Well, they decided that they would take this piece of land and not let it become developed, and created this park. So it's very famous. You used to be able to ride horse and buggies through there. I think that is no longer true. They've turned them into electric car rides, or whatever. Anyway, He also, if you've ever gone to, the big mansion that's down in, Asheville, North Carolina, the Biltmore Estate. The Vanderbilts who built that home, which at the time, and probably still is, the largest private residence in the United States, they hired him to do their gardening, to develop the gardens for that house. Now, slums, this could be a picture of tenements too, but this is what slums would look like, called tenement houses. Lacked indoor plumbing, and they bred disease. In some places of New York, there were 900 people living in each acre because of the number of people that would be living in one of these rooms. There were no rules about how many people could fit into an apartment. There's always room for one more, is the theory. So there was places that in the city, there was genuine squalor. No running water, even if there was running water, cold water, often not hot water, and no indoor plumbing as it relates to bathroom facilities. And those things needed to change. Now, as the city grew, the city would also develop what became known as a political machine that were loosely knit coalitions organized at the ward level, the lowest level of political organization. And you bring in immigrants who don't know how to speak English. They would help them to get jobs and sign them up to vote most likely Democratic. And then if they voted Democratic, the Democratic Party would see to it that they got a job, and they would tell them that this job was because they voted Democratic. And they would create a political machine, the most famous of which was the Tweed machine. William Marcy Tweed, who ran Tammany Hall, which was the group of politicians. They were controlled by bosses that nominated candidates to get out the vote. Anyone remember watching the movie Mr. Smith Goes to Washington with Jackie Stewart? You should watch that. Jackie Stewart is Mr. Smith, who is not a politician. And he gets nominated by the governor because his son likes him because he manages their scout troop. But there are two machine politicians, each vying for the nomination. And of course, he is, the governor can't decide who he's going to nominate because he'll alienate one of the machines. So eventually he picks Mr. Smith, and then it degenerates into a big political fight over the preservation of a little park somewhere that he wants to create. And a big filibuster ensues. And as a result, he stands up against the powerful elites in Washington. But that shows the corruption of the political bosses. And I should say that it's not just Republicans. In New York, it was definitely a Democratic machine. Philadelphia and Chicago, it was Republican. They delivered jobs, services to inner city neighborhoods in exchange for ballots. And back then you could know how people voted. Modern urban sports are a legacy of these machine politicians. The Tammany Hall was the main political machine in New York, led by this man, William Marcy Tweed. Not good for the city since most bosses were thieves and required kickbacks in order to get governmental contracts. And it encouraged dependence of its constituents on the city. Another here is the early effects at reform. And the first early effect of reform that we're going to deal with here is the Women's Christian Temperance Union. These are the WCTU Women's Prayer Crusade. Early efforts at reform. Now, one of the other pictures that I've used in the past was a bunch of women with the sign saying, "Lips that touch alcohol will never touch ours." And after looking at the picture, I think those women would be more likely kissed with men that had some alcohol on their lips. But in this case, here is a prayer group. I can see Miss Griff, Miss Mallory in their prime, standing here praying in the bar while the men were drinking. Anyway, the Women's Christian Temperance Union was the largest women's organization in the world. And for a while, led by this lady, Frances Willard, who was from Chicago, and she did everything she could to end alcohol in America. Well, the world, really. It was founded in 1873 and led to prominence by Frances Willard, who was probably its most famous president. A statue of her still stands today in Washington, D.C. at the Capitol. Connected to women's suffrage, to home protection, and coerced temperance by government control. The men's group was called the Anti-Saloon League, and it was just as effective, but with men. And there, they were willing to use the political power to suggest that if you weren't prohibition, anti-alcohol, especially within the Republican Party, you wouldn't get nominated. And so very similar to the pro-life movement or some other group, the Tea Party or whatever the system might be today, if you weren't taking the very position that you needed on the issue of alcohol, you might get primaried and not get reelected. Not every person who supported prohibition was really anti-alcohol. That is including the senator from Texas who introduced the resolution to ban alcohol with the 18th Amendment, because he ran an illegal still on his farm. He just needed to be pro-prohibition to get the Republican nomination in order to run for the Senate in Texas. So he had to be on that ballot, but that's because of the Anti-Saloon League. They were very politically active, whereas Frances Willard was more using moral suasion to get people to do what she wanted.
This whirlwind of the Lord, but it has set forces in motion which each day become more potent, and it will sweep on until the rum power in America is overthrown. Frances Willard.
Frances Elizabeth Caroline Willard was herself a whirlwind. Called Saint Francis by her most ardent admirers, she was a master strategist who would come to command a nonviolent national army, 250,000 strong, against alcohol, the Women's Christian Temperance Union.
Frances Willard is one of the great unsung heroes of American history. There was a time when every school child in America knew her, and she was sort of on par with Betsy Ross. She was that important to American history.
A pioneer in women's education and a champion of women's rights, Willard took the reins of the WCTU in 1879 and did not relinquish them until her death 19 years later. At Rest Cottage, her home in Evanston, Illinois, she rose at 6 each day and for 8 hours straight dictated letters, speeches, articles, and books to her secretary and longtime companion, Anna Gordon. But the two women were rarely at home. During the first 9 years of her presidency, Willard claimed she had spoken in more than 1,000 American towns, including every single city with more than 10,000 citizens, and most of those with only 5,000. She took her struggle abroad as well, founding a world's WCTU that gathered nearly 1 million signatures on a canvas petition addressed to all the rulers of the world, imploring them to join hands in a global ban on alcohol.
There is a war about this in America, a war of mothers and daughters, sisters and wives, a war between the rum shops and religion, a war to the knife and the knife to the hilt. Only one can win. The question is, which one is it going to be?
Willard forged an alliance between the WCTU and the women's suffrage movement, bringing thousands of women into the struggle for the ballot. To appeal to women still too timid to assert themselves, Willard coined a consciously conservative slogan, home protection. A woman who found it unseemly to demand the vote solely as a right could justify calling for the ballot as what Willard called a weapon of protection from the tyranny of drink. And concerned that a growing number of housewives were becoming addicted to popular patent medicines that often contained as much alcohol as whiskey, she established homes for inebriate women. As a pure and wholesome alternative to alcohol, the WCTU installed public water fountains in village squares and city parks across America. But getting rid of alcohol was not Frances Willard's only cause. The WCTU eventually had more than 45 departments organized on behalf of a host of causes: street children and fallen women, female matrons for women's prisons, and free kindergarten for every child, equal pay for equal work, and raising the age of sexual consent from 10 to 16.
And she would move from alcohol to votes for women, to orphanages, to asylums, to what she called Christian socialism. All these things put together. It was sort of promising a heaven on earth, an idealized society at a time when utopian wishes were not at all uncommon in American society.
But no single program had more impact than the Department of Scientific Temperance Instruction, meant to train generations of boys and girls dedicated to eradicating alcohol, and to do it through the public school system.
Childhood saved today from the saloon, and the nation thus saved tomorrow, is the stake played for in this desperate game. All that is holiest in mother love, all that is purest in patriotism that would save the country from the saloon, enters into our support of these textbooks. Mary Hanchett Hunt.
Frances Willard placed Mary Hanchett Hunt in charge of the department. Hunt lobbied state legislatures and the Congress to require anti-alcohol indoctrination in the schools, forced textbook publishers to conform to the WCTU's message, and sometimes demanded kickbacks in exchange for her stamp of approval. She also directed women from chapters all over the country to pressure local school boards. Before long, public school children in every state, 22 million of them, were sitting through temperance classes 3 times a week. Kindergartners were taught to chant, "Tremble, King Alcohol, we shall grow up." Older children studied texts filled with lurid misinformation calculated to terrify. Just one drink, some books allege, could burn away the lining of the throat and stomach and begin eating away at the liver and kidneys.
You know, little Johnny has one drink, and the next picture, he's lying in the gutter, unconscious. One of their most notorious things is they had diagrams of body parts. You would have a diagram of a stomach, and then they had a diagram of an inebriate stomach. And what happens to you? Well, the inebriate stomach was full color.
So the Women's Christian Temperance Union was a great reform organization. This would have been their heyday in the early 20th century. So anyway, Frances Willard, very important. Go to Washington, look up her statue. It's somewhere in Statuary Hall. From the state of Illinois. That's where she was from. Okay, you come back. We're going to continue on with education reform. in the cities.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you.